The Alpha King chose her sister at the ceremony, so she vanished with his twins. A true story. There are some moments in life that you never forget. Not because they were beautiful, but because they broke something inside you that never fully healed. This is a story about one of those moments, and about a woman who, instead of falling apart, quietly picked up everything she had left and walked away, far away, with a secret so big that it would one day change everything. Let's go back to where it all started. Nadia was not the kind of woman people noticed right away. She was not the loudest person in the room. She did not dress to impress or talk just to be heard. She was the kind of person who showed up early, stayed late, and gave more than she was ever asked to give. She was steady, she was real, and in a world full of noise, there was something quietly magnetic about her, even if most people were too busy to see it. She had worked as a healer inside one of the most powerful wolf packs in the region for 3 years. Her job was to tend to the sick, prepare medicines, and make sure the Alpha King and his inner circle were always in good health. It sounds like a simple job on paper, but in practice, it meant she was always close, always nearby, always the one people turned to when things went wrong at 3 in the morning. The Alpha King's name was Zion, and Zion was the kind of man who filled a room without even trying. He was tall, broad-shouldered, quiet, in the way that only truly powerful people are. He did not bark orders or make a show of his strength. He simply existed, and everything around him adjusted. Wolves twice his age lowered their heads when he walked by. Enemies thought twice before challenging him. Even the moon seemed to shine a little differently on the nights he stood under it. Nadia had spent 3 years by his side. She had treated his injuries after battles. She had sat with him through fevers that would have knocked most wolves off their feet for weeks. She knew which tea helped him sleep, and which food he quietly pushed aside at the dinner table, even when he pretended to eat it. She knew the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, and could tell just from the rhythm whether his day had been hard or harder. She never said any of this out loud. She never let herself believe it meant something, but somewhere deep inside, in a place she barely admitted existed, she hoped. She had hoped for a long time. The moon ceremony was the most important night of the year for their pack. It was the night when the Alpha King would publicly choose his mate in front of the entire pack, under the full moon, in front of the moon goddess herself. It was sacred. It was permanent. And for weeks before it happened, there had been whispers everywhere. Nadia had tried not to listen to those whispers. She had tried to stay focused on her work, on her duties, on being professional. But she was human, or at least, as human as a wolf can be, and the hope had been growing quietly inside her like a small, persistent flame. On the night of the ceremony, she wore a simple dress. Dark blue, soft fabric, nothing fancy. She stood near the back of the crowd, hands clasped together, heart beating so loud she was almost certain the person standing next to her could hear it. Zion walked into the ceremony hall, and the whole room went still. He looked the way he always looked, composed, unreadable, like a man who had already decided everything and was simply carrying it out. He walked through the crowd slowly. Nadia's heart climbed higher with every step he took. And then he stopped. He stopped in front of a woman standing near the front of the hall. A woman in a gold dress. A woman with a bright smile and warm eyes. Nadia's sister, Rania. The silence in the room lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then the crowd erupted into cheers and congratulations, and the sound of howls rising into the night air. Zion placed the ceremonial mark around Rania's neck. Rania smiled like she had been waiting her whole life for this. And maybe she had. Nadia stood at the back of the hall and did not move. She did not cry. She did not make a sound. She just stood there while the world celebrated around her, feeling something drain out of her slowly, like water out of a glass that had a crack at the bottom. A crack so small you do not even see it until the glass is already empty. She left quietly. No one noticed. She walked to the small courtyard behind the hall, the one with the old stone bench and the overgrown ivy on the walls. She sat down. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. And that was when the full weight of everything hit her. Because Nadia was not just heartbroken, she was pregnant. She had found out 2 weeks before the ceremony. She had been planning to tell Zion. She had rehearsed the words in her head 100 times. She had told herself she would wait for the right moment, the right time, the right setting. She had kept waiting. And now, there was no right moment. There was no moment at all. She sat on that stone bench for a long time, long enough for the celebration sounds to fade, long enough for the moon to move across the sky, long enough to make a decision. By morning, Nadia was gone. She packed only what she could carry. She left her resignation letter under the door of the head healer's office. She did not write a note for Rania. She did not write a note for Zion. There was nothing left to say to either of them. She simply walked to the border of pack territory, crossed it, and kept going. She ended up in a small, forgotten town called Meyerwood. It was the kind of place that did not ask questions, the kind of place where people minded their own lives and let you mind yours. There were a few dozen families there, mostly wolves who had left their packs for one reason or another. And they had built something quiet and honest together. Nadia built something there too. She set up a small healing practice out of a 2-room cottage near the edge of town. Word spread quickly. She was good at her job, better than good actually. She had a gift for it. Within a few months she was the person the whole town turned to when someone fell sick, when a child had a fever, when the elderly wolves needed their medicines adjusted. She was not rich. She was not powerful, but she was needed, and she was good, and slowly, very slowly, she began to feel like herself again. Her twins were born on a winter night, a boy first, and then a girl. The boy came into the world loudly, with a cry so strong that the midwife actually stepped back for a second. The girl came quietly, eyes already open, looking around like she was already figuring out where she was. Nadia named the boy Soren, and the girl Zara. Raising 2 children alone was not easy. There is no honest way to say it was. Some nights she was so tired she could barely lift her head. Some mornings, she looked at the 2 tiny faces sleeping beside her, and felt a fear so deep, it had no name. What if she was not enough? What if she made the wrong choices? What if the world found them, and took something from them that she could not get back? But then Soren would wake up and immediately start trying to climb something he had no business climbing, and Zara would look at him with the most patient, tired expression. At 3 years old, she was already more sensible than most adults Nadia knew, and Nadia would feel it. That thing that has no name either. The warm, fierce, absolute certainty that these 2 people were worth every single hard thing. She raised them simply. She told them the truth about as much as children can understand. She taught them to be honest, to be kind, and to be brave. She did not tell them about their father. Not yet. She told them their father was someone she had cared about once, and that one day, when they were older, she would explain the rest. The years passed quietly. Meanwhile, back in the pack, things were not so quiet. Rania had become the queen. She wore the title well on the surface. She was gracious and composed, and people liked her. But there were things she could not do. There were things only Nadia had known how to do. Small things that nobody thought mattered until they were missing. Zion's headaches came back. The herbal preparations that had always managed them did not work when anyone else made them. Something was always slightly off. He slept poorly. He was harder to reach in the mornings, slower to focus, quicker to frustration. He told himself it was the stress of leadership. He told himself it was the weight of responsibility. But his wolf, which had been strangely quiet for years, like a dog sitting by a door waiting for someone who left and has not come back, his wolf knew better. 5 years after Nadia disappeared, a plague came. It started in the outer territories and moved fast. Wolves were getting sick in ways that the pack healers had not seen before. The usual treatments were not working. The palace sent its best healers to the affected areas, and they did everything right, by the book, by every method they knew, and wolves were still dying. And then a scout came back from the outer borders with a strange report. There was a small town called Meyerwood, and in that town there was a healer who had been treating the same illness, and wolves were not dying in Meyerwood, they were recovering. Zion read the report twice. Then he asked for the healer's description. The scout said, "A woman, dark hair, quiet voice, very calm under pressure, knows what she is doing, like she has done it 1,000 times. The whole town trusts her completely." Zayn was quiet for a long time after hearing that. He rode to Meyerwood himself. He told his inner circle it was because the pack needed that cure, and he was not going to wait for it to be delivered slowly through middlemen. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. He arrived at dusk. The town was small. He found the healer's cottage without much difficulty. because half the people he passed gave him directions before he even finished asking. Clearly, she was someone people talked about here. He pushed open the low gate and walked into the small front yard, and there she was. Nadia was kneeling in the small garden beside the cottage, checking something growing in the soil. Her hair was loose. She was wearing an ordinary dress, nothing remarkable. She looked, there was no other word for it, like someone who had found where they belonged. She looked up when she heard the gate. The moment lasted only a second. Her face went through several things very quickly. Shock, pain, something like anger. And then, almost deliberately, nothing. She schooled her expression flat, the way someone does when they have had years to prepare for something they always knew might happen. She stood up slowly. She did not say his name. She did not say anything. And then the cottage door burst open, and a 5-year-old boy came running out at full speed, crashing into her side, talking loudly about something he had found in the yard. The air around him was different, sharp, strong, the kind of presence that made even adults instinctively pay attention. He had Zion's eyes. A girl appeared in the doorway a moment later, quieter, more careful. She looked at the stranger in her yard the way children look at something they do not yet have a category for. And then she said, in a very clear, very simple voice, "Mama, who is that man?" Zion's legs nearly went out from under him. Nadia put a hand on her son's shoulder. She kept her voice steady. "Go inside for a moment, both of you." They listened. Soren with some protest, Zara with one last long look at the stranger, and the door closed behind them. The silence between Nadia and Zion was thick enough to touch. He said her name. That was all he managed. She looked at him, not with hate, which somehow would have been easier to receive. She looked at him with the quiet, tired, very clear eyes of someone who has already processed the worst of something and come out the other side. Someone who is not angry anymore, not because the hurt went away, but because she decided a long time ago that she was not going to let it own her. "Why are you here, Zayan?" she said. He told her about the plague. He told her the pack needed her methods, needed her knowledge. He told her that wolves were dying, and she was the only one who seemed to know what to do. She nodded slowly. "I'll help," she said simply. "For the wolves, they did not do anything to me." And then she looked at him, very directly, and said, "But we are going to talk. Not tonight, when the sick are stable. But we are going to talk, and you are going to listen this time." He nodded. He knew she was right. He had not listened. Not the way he should have. He had been afraid of something he could not name, and he had made a choice from that fear. And he had spent 5 years trying not to think about the shape of the thing he had lost. He spent the next week in Meyerwood. He helped where he could. He watched Nadia work. The focus, the steadiness, the way the entire town leaned on her without her ever seeming to strain under the weight. He watched Soren tear through the yard every morning like a small storm. He watched Zara sit quietly and read, and occasionally say something so sharp and correct that the adults around her went silent for a second. When the sick wolves began recovering, Nadia came to find him one evening by the narrow river that ran behind the town. They talked for a long time. She did not scream at him. She did not need to. She told him plainly what that night had cost her, what she had walked away carrying alone, what it had felt like to build a life from scratch in a place where nobody knew her name, with 2 small children, and nothing but her own 2 hands, and whatever was left of her pride. He listened. He did not make excuses. Whatever he had been 5 years ago, the man who was too proud, too afraid, too willing to let duty override his heart, he had spent 5 years living with the result of that. He knew what he had done. He knew what it had cost. And he knew that saying sorry was not going to be enough. That sorry was just the beginning. "I chose wrong," he said. "I knew it the moment I did it, and I was too proud to undo it. And then time passed, and it felt too late, and I told myself, you had moved on. I told myself you were better, without the complications of my life. I told myself a lot of things." He looked at her. None of them were true. Nadia looked at the river for a long time. "I did not do this waiting for you," she said finally. "I want you to know that. I built this life because my children needed a life, not because I was hoping you would come find it." "I know," he said. "But," she said, and she turned to look at him, "they deserve to know who their father is, and I am tired of carrying everything alone." It was not a declaration of love. It was not a dramatic reunion. It was something quieter and more honest than that. It was 2 people, older and more broken and more real than they had been 5 years ago, deciding that the truth was worth more than the comfortable distance they had both been keeping. What happened after was slow. There was no fairy tale ending that landed perfectly in a single moment. Zayan came back to the pack, and he answered for what he had done, to his council, to the people who trusted him, and to Rania, who had known about the pregnancy and said nothing. That conversation, by all accounts, was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Rania left quietly. She did not fight. Perhaps somewhere underneath everything, she had always known that the thing she had built was not really hers to keep. Soren and Zara were brought into the pack as their father's children. The pack adjusted, slowly, awkwardly, the way packs always adjust to things they did not plan for. Soren made it easier by being immediately the most loud and charming and impossible to ignore child anyone had ever encountered. Zara made it easier by being so quietly unimpressed by everything that it was hard to feel too dramatic about anything in her presence. Nadia came back. Not all at once, not in a rush. She came back the way people come back to things they were not sure they deserved, carefully, on her own terms, checking at every step that this was real and not just another thing that would eventually break. Zayan gave her the time. He did not rush her. He was learning, finally, what it meant to listen first and act second. And the same moon that had watched all of it from the beginning, rose over the pack on the night Nadia finally came home, and did not say a word. It did not need to.